Happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that Mother's Day is not always a happy day for everybody. I want to give special encouragement today to people who have strained or non-existent relationships with their mothers, those who have lost their mothers, whether they have coped well or are still mourning, those who have assumed motherly roles in people's lives, those who have been unable to have kids of their own, mothers who have lost their children, people who may not know who their natural mother is, mothers who struggle to connect with their kids, stepmothers, foster mothers, adoptive mothers, etc. There are many versions of motherhood. I heard that there's an over-under on how many times I'm going to cry today. So somebody will be happy one way or the other. But this is a photo of my mother and my brother and me when I had a lot more hair. The truth is that I haven't had a normal Mother's Day since 2019. But before I do that, what would a daylight sermon be without some etymology? So this is the Greek version of the word mama. Many linguists believe it comes from the sound that a child makes. It forms the root for words like mammary and mammal. What else? It suggests comfort, care, nurturing, and provision. So, and I believe it's pronounced just like it reads, mama. So again, as I said, I haven't had a normal Mother's Day since 2019. The picture on the far right was taken in March of 2020. On May 3rd, 2020, a week before Mother's Day, my mom had her first stroke. It affected the right side of her brain, which impacted the left side of her body. She was rushed to the hospital in the middle of this thing we had called COVID-19. And so because of that, I was not able to visit her at any point in her stay at the hospital. The picture on the closer right is the car ride from when she was released to the hospital and went to a rehab facility. That was the first time that I saw her during that whole period where she would spend another 6 weeks where visits were impossible. She eventually came home, but had dramatic changes to her quality of life. A woman who usually frequented flea markets and yard sales, enjoyed playing with her grandchildren, loved the chance to go fishing, had been confined to a wheelchair, and having to cope with learning to live her life without the full use of the left side of her body. She would continuously push, sometimes way too hard, to regain the independence and dignity that had defined her for so long. On February 22nd, I got a call that my mother had had another stroke at the nursing home. And I rode with my brother and Max just 3 days prior to that, taking her to that nursing home. And she was crying during the drive, and it was one of those wailing cries. I'd gotten a work call. I'm trying to get her to calm down so I could take the call. She eventually calmed down, and we laughed and joked because if you know my mom, you know there were some ridiculous things that she did. But in this instance, she was trying to sneak a jar of pickled bologna into the nursing home with her. And so we were in the car laughing about how she was going to get this bologna into the nursing home. And so when we got there, I jokingly covered her face with a scarf and I kissed her head and I told her I'd see her soon. But I didn't know what that would actually look like. What I learned was that strokes are measured on a scale. And medical professionals don't expect people to survive a stroke that scores higher than a 25. Mom's second stroke scored 34. It affected the left side of her brain, which would have been the right side of her body, and was more severe than the first. Recovery was described to us at best as life in a vegetative state with little to no body function, a feeding tube, and around-the-clock care. This is a way of life that previously she had expressed to many people that she did not want to have. So Shay and I made the difficult decision to begin comfort measures. But back to the part where I said, "I see you soon." I hate hospitals. I detest hospitals. And initially I was convinced that I didn't want to see my mom in this state. If I was at a point where if the last memory I have is laughing about pickled bologna and covering your face with a scarf, then I'm good with that. But my father reminded me that we all don't have the luxury of a perfect goodbye, and that someday, even if she wasn't coherent, that my presence might mean something to her and later on to me. And he was right. The next day, I went to sit with her. That night, I had typed out a letter of everything I wanted to say. I read the letter to her, and I sat there. And I sat there every day until she passed away on March 1st. All right, you over and under tier people, here we go. There are a few people I'd like to thank publicly at this time. First of all, my brother Shay, who bore the challenge of handling all of Mom's affairs and doing so with grit and respect. I eternally love you and appreciate you. Next, I'd like to thank my church family. H was in constant contact with me throughout the entire ordeal and was right there at the funeral. Ryan Murphy, who is absent, provided encouraging words and a meal. Marilyn emailed me a gift card and checked on me every week, especially on the first Mother's Day after this loss. Even this morning, she said, "I'm praying for you and I think about you every Mother's Day." Because at that time, I was a mess. Daylight Church was certainly the hands and feet of Christ when I needed it the most. And I love you and thank you for that. I'd also like to thank my work family. Mr. Pat worked an 8-hour shift overnight, but showed up at the funeral. The kids at work all made heartfelt sympathy cards, and they were placed there at the flowers at the funeral. My boss, Matt, extended a sense of patience, support, and understanding for me during that time. The hug he gave me at that funeral that morning was the green light that I needed to cry and let all my emotions out. Matt, you will forever be my brother, and I thank you for that. So during the funeral, I looked at my mom and I smiled, not only looking back at all of the memories, but I'd also looked at the future, because in my heart of hearts, I believe that my mother is in heaven, fully healed, restored, probably doing cartwheels. And if I intend to see her again, it'll have to be in heaven. And so that means I have to get there, which leads to the title of this sermon. This ain't the one that gets me into heaven. I say that to say that there is not one single thing that will get me there, but more a series of actions. This sermon does not punch my ticket, but it's one action in a series of actions. It's a progression of growth within Christianity and a daily pursuit to be more Christ-like. Jesus laid out many examples of what that looked like. But in looking back with the time that I did have with my mother, she laid out some pretty amazing examples of Christ-like actions that were almost like drop breadcrumbs for me to follow. And I'd like to delve into some of those through story and scripture and hope that you get something out of them as well. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." Mom raised us in the church all the time. When I say all the time, I mean all the time. There was Sunday school, morning service, afternoon service, Bible study, choir practice. At one point, Mom was even the secretary at the church, so we were always at church. And honestly, that may have played a part in my young adult years that included goals of staying away from church. I felt like I'd had too much of it and just couldn't take anymore. But at a certain point, I realized that this life was bigger than me and that he had always been present. If there was a gap between us, I had caused it, and I needed to draw closer. And so I did and continue to do so. Romans 12:13 says, share with the Lord's people who are in need and practice hospitality. Mom gave. She gave a lot, and sometimes to a fault. I can remember but cannot count the times that she had went out of her way to make sure that others had, even if that meant that she had less or sometimes none. From that, Mama taught me to be charitable and be nice to people, but also that you don't have to announce it when you do it. Just do it. Just let that be who you are. 1 Peter 4:10 says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I can't sing at all. But Mom signed me up for the choir at church, and later in years I told her that I would lip sync because I really don't like my voice when I sing. And at the time, I played a violin, and my brother played a trombone. And I've never looked at those as complementing musical instruments, but somehow Mom signed us up to play Christmas carols at the church. She voluntold us that this is what we would do. And her aim was to help us find the gifts that we had and would use them to serve. I found myself as a youth leader in church and at work using what I have to serve. And from that, Mama said, whatever you do or you can do, find a way to do that for the Lord. How am I doing? Okay. All right, just checking. Just checking. You said go long? All right. Next slide. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. And so Mom would display this by always looking out for people. Victims of domestic violence would find Mom giving advice and sometimes even shelter. Mom worked at a halfway house for recovering addicts, helping them to get back on their feet and back to their kids and their families. Mom had over 40 foster kids in and out of her home during a certain period of time. Mom was all about family. So I'm happy to see a lot of my family here today. Mom's work with children and unifying families helped spark my career in social services. A curiosity turned into a career. Watching a model that she set turned into a desire to want to be a part of that. Luke 14 says, "But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." My first job ever was at KFC, and it gave me the chance to meet some pretty interesting and hungry people. One of those people was Miss Margaret. Miss Margaret was a sassy older lady who drove TARC buses and came in daily on her lunch break. She would order 2 chicken legs, mashed potatoes with no gravy, greens, and a Pepsi. And at certain points, she didn't want anybody else making her food but me. Through conversations, I would learn that she didn't have much family to connect with, and she pretty much stayed to herself. In between some profanities and vulgarities, she would have some pretty sound advice at times. She would encourage me. She'd say, "Open your mouth and talk. People need to hear what you have to say." And for those that know me, can you imagine a time that I didn't like to talk? When my mom came to pick me up one day, I introduced her to Miss Margaret, and in that brief interaction, Mom invited her to Thanksgiving dinner at our home. One year, when Safe Place had many youth there on Thanksgiving, more than usual, Mom asked me how many of them I could bring home with me. Mom was never looking for any sort of payment or accolades. She was making a deposit on her vacation to heaven. And also, all this talk about food and the way that Daylight loves to eat, Mom would have fit right in. Luke 12:17 says, "Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows." Quan, how are you going to turn this into something? Well, I wanted to wrestle in high school. My freshman year, I tried out for basketball. They cut me because I said I was too short. Well, okay, whatever. So my sophomore year, I was in the cafeteria, and a coach comes in and goes, "What sport do you play?" And I said, "None." I said, "I tried out for basketball." He said, "Let me guess. They cut you because you were too short?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "I got something for you." And he talked to me about wrestling. I remember I ran all the way home on a Friday. Mom was laying on the couch asleep. I said, "Hey, Mom, can I wrestle?" And she's like, "No." But I chalked it up to, "She's asleep." I was like, "All right, I'll wait." So I'll ask her Sunday before we go back to school on Monday. "Hey, Mom, I asked you Friday if you," "Yeah, I know," and the answer is no. I was like, okay. Well, at that moment, I was like, okay. But I went to my room, and I was pretty upset. My mom said that I didn't have a killer instinct. My mom said that if I would have injured someone, it would have damaged me psychologically, and I would have never been able to forgive myself. And I disagreed. I pleaded my case. I said, "I don't have to have a killer instinct. I just got to put them on their back for 3 seconds." But to no avail. I don't know if she knows or not, but I did wrestle a few matches in high school when she didn't show up. I'm 2-2, and I won 2 matches by forfeit, so thank you very much. There's another trivia question for you all out there. We even had a more heated discussion about this decision at some point in my early 30s on the way back from Disney. I was like, but you didn't let me wrestle. And she said that she would have stuck by her original decision and still wouldn't have let me wrestle. But she held me back because she knew me better than I knew myself. Similar to how God does with us. There are certain things that are not allowed to be, that we are not allowed to be a part of because it's simply not what's best for us. Regardless of what we see or feel or think, there was someone who knows bigger and knows better. And so even if I disagreed with the decision that she made at that time, I have grown to agree with her understanding of my levels of empathy. So here's a pretty crazy list. We may find ourselves on this list, but we can still be used for the glory of God. Mom taught me that God uses broken people. His might is amplified within our imperfections. For example, I'm not up here doing this because I am perfect. I am up here because I marvel at the fact that someone who struggled and still does occasionally with stuttering said yes to a request to do a public talk. From elementary through high school, I stuttered very badly. In the summer, I would carry around a piece of paper and make a mark every time I stuttered, and they would use that to measure whether or not I needed to take speech class the next year. So again, someone who is afraid to talk to somebody who can't shut up, that's a blessing. And so again, it's not because I've done things right. I was in a position and asked, and I said yes. The truth is that I was supposed to. I talked with H about doing a sermon about my trip to Jerusalem, which has not happened as of yet. And so as H was lining up speakers, he said, well, what about the first weekend in April? And I was like, H, that's WrestleMania weekend, man. I don't know if I could do that. All right. And so he said, well, what about, he gave me a few more dates and he sprinkled May 12th in there. And I was like, that's kind of heavy. That's Mother's Day. And he said, well, I think what you may have to share might resonate with some people. I said, all right, well, let me ponder on that. So I thought about it and I prayed and I told him the next day, all right, man, I'll do it. Again, it was a chance to say yes. Because no matter where we find ourselves on this list, we're all broken. But that also means that we're in a perfect position for God to use us. All right, you over-under tier people, here you go. My mother always supported me, whether I was right or wrong. Even if she did not love my behavior or my actions, she loved me as her son. Her prayers have directly resulted in me still being alive and as blessed as I am, considering all things. She listened to my first 2 albums. Don't ask. She sat at my bar when I was a bartender. She came to my first public speaking seminar. She was right there the first time I was ordained as a deacon. And if she were alive today, she'd be sitting right there. And hopefully she would be proud. In heaven, She's probably doing that cartwheel again right about now. But she would also tell me when I was wrong. And this one haunts me. There were times that she needed and wanted me, and that I would take for granted that she would always be able, be active, be available, and be here. But that's not always the case. And if you notice in this exchange, I didn't choose to defend my absence. I attempted to reverse it. I'm wrong. I got it. I'll do better. And I did. It's a pretty cool mantra. Almost at the end here. Y'all might get a few extra minutes in your day. So if I could summarize everything that I've stood here and attempted to share. First of all, forgive. And I put in there where you can, because I know some people struggle with being able to forgive. I would encourage you to pray on that and look for it. Because not only is forgiveness Christ-like, but not being able to forgive is sometimes blocking your healing and your blessings. Take the time to reflect. Take the time to apply the understanding of today to the memories of yesterday. Hindsight always provides a different perspective. Putting this sermon together for the past couple months has been a remarkable reflection. I've had ups and downs as I've done this. There's some days I've smiled, some days I've cried, and some days it's a combination of both. But that reflection is helpful. Next, I would encourage you to multiply the good. Seeing, hearing, and receiving good should inspire us to do good. Observing a need for good should prompt us to do good. Because what's the result? More good. Not gooder, but more good. I would also encourage you to make the time. Eliminate excuses, close the gaps. Be what you might want and need from family to what you have as family. Whatever unit you consider family, be the thing that you are missing from them. That closes the gap. That's how and why you make the time. Which part? Be what you might want and need from family to what you have as family. Uh-oh, now I gotta rewind, play. Whatever it is that you are missing, you need to be that with whatever it is that you consider as family, because that might be the glue that holds everybody together. That is the reason that the time should be made and how that time gets made. Did I recapture that good? Okay. All right. Last but not least, I would encourage you to start packing. Again, this sermon was not my automatic ticket punch to glory. I cannot wait to reconnect with Freddie in heaven again. But I know that I have some things to do down here to get ready for that while I still have time. Things, plural. It is a prize, but it is also a process. A journey of progress that will hopefully lead me to a closer relationship with God, a reservation in heaven, and a reunification with my mother.